Some wounds don't shout. They whisper. They whisper things like, you're not enough, or you're too much, or that's not for people like you, or you don't get to want that, or be grateful for what you have, or you're asking for too much. See, these weren't always said directly. Sometimes they were just implied in the silence, or in the way that affection was rationed, in the way that your joy was met with suspicion, in the way that your desire was shamed, in the way that your boundaries were bulldozed over, in the way that your voice got quieter, not because you had less to say, but because no one ever made space to hear it. This is Uber Bintegers, where we stop pretending and start living with integrity and intimacy. So let's maybe speak some truth together, shall we? For many of us, our sense of worth wasn't destroyed in a single dramatic moment. It eroded over time, slowly, subtly, through these moments of internal exile, moments where we didn't just feel unloved, we felt unallowed to feel too deeply, unallowed to want too much, unallowed to rest without guilt, unallowed to shine too brightly, unallowed to take up space without apology, unallowed to dream beyond survival, unallowed to exist without explanation. And so we learned to survive within the walls that we were given. We learned to minimize our hunger. We, like our emotional and creative and spiritual and physical expressions of it, we learned to mistrust our own desire, to, in essence, mute our expressions, to make our joy digestible, to make our excellence invisible, to make our neediness disappear. And then somewhere along the way, we began to actually believe and say things like, this must mean that I'm not worthy of more. See, I don't think that belief came from nowhere, though. I think it came from the accumulation of cues that told us that we were too much for the rooms that we were in, or not enough for the table that we're sitting at. And then over time, it just stuck. Because when those messages are given to you early enough in life, or often enough, well, then you just stop questioning them altogether. And then you stop reaching for more. And then you stop asking for what you actually need. And then you stop imagining something different of what could be. And then you start living as if you're always on thin ice with love. Always just a few steps away from being too much, too needy, too slow, too loud, or too bold. And then you learn to self-regulate. And then you pre-reject yourself. And then you abandon your own longings before anyone else can shame you for those longings. And then over time you forget how to recognize what it is that you even want in life. See, this is what it means to internalize the not enough or not allowed to, you know? It's not just about external rejection as much as it is about self-denial that's rooted in this survival that we had to learn along the way. But let's just take a moment and say this now, shall we? Desire is not dangerous. Hunger is not a flaw. Yearning is not a sin. You were meant to live instead of having to just be numb and be tolerated. So let's bring back these core foundations of integrity and intimacy we explore. Integrity, like I said, means this alignment between your inner truth and your external actions. But how do we live with integrity if our inner truth has in essence been shut down? How do we align with the voice that we were taught to ignore in the first place? And intimacy? Intimacy is that honest experience of being seen for who we truly are. But again, how can we be seen if we keep editing ourselves just to be allowed in the rooms that we're in? See, this is where the real healing work begins, I believe. We can't reclaim our worth if we still believe that our longings are what disqualify us in the first place. We can't become whole if we still think certain parts of us are too much to bring into the rooms that we enter. And I mean, we can't embody integrity if we're only showing the parts of us that feel safe enough to share. So let's start here. Let's start at this point here. What are the things that you've been telling yourself that you're not allowed to want in the first place? Is it that you've not allowed yourself to rest without guilt? Or to be celebrated without having to earn it in the first place? Or to ask for touch? To say that you're lonely? Or to desire emotional closeness without the shame that accompanies it? Maybe it's to speak freely even when your voice feels shaky, or to make art that no one really understands but you. Maybe it's to take up space and not to apologize for doing so. See, most of us were never told directly that you're not allowed, but we learned the script through repeated feedback, didn't we? And when the feedback is consistent, then we just stop challenging it. We stop trying. We silence ourselves before anyone can silence us first, right? And then we shrink inside our own skin. And that shrinking becomes our norm. But consider this. We were never too much. We were just surrounded by people who had too little capacity for us. Say that again to yourself. We were not too much. We were just too real for the environments that couldn't hold our honesty. Too expressive for communities that prioritized appearances over being real. Too sensitive for families perhaps that never learned emotional safety and what that could be like. Or too questioning for systems that demanded obedience from us. Maybe too alive for spaces that only understood what control was. And that's not a judgment, that's just clarification. Because without clarity, we'll keep taking their lack of capacity as proof of our lack of worth. And that's a lie I don't think that we can afford to keep living in. So today, let's begin the process of reclaiming what's ours. Let's maybe start by taking an inventory of where we've internalized unworthiness, for starters. For example, where do we still whisper our needs instead of actually naming them out loud? Where do we feel guilt for wanting rest or touch or beauty or celebration? Where do we feel shame for desiring more? Like more connection, more freedom, more joy? Where are we shrinking ourselves to avoid making others uncomfortable? And then let's ask, who gave us the idea that love had to be earned through invisibility? Who was it that taught us that wanting something disqualifies us from actually receiving it? And who modeled versions of worthiness that required emotional self-erasing? See, we're not obligated to live by the rules of people who were afraid of their own hearts, right? We are allowed to live differently. We are allowed to want things. We're allowed to be fully human in our expressions with our needs and our dreams and our desires and even our complexities. We are allowed to explore life beyond the survival that we've been settling for. And when we do that, I don't think we're betraying anyone. We're just remembering what was always ours. So again, let me say this to the younger versions of ourselves, okay? the love that you had to earn was not real love. And the rest that you were denied is still your birthright. The joy that you were told to quiet still belongs to you. The tears that you were mocked for were sacred. And the questions that you had are valid. The dreams that you hid are not too late. And this is not about defiance. This is about integrity. Living from the truth of who we are and not from the scripts that we have inherited in life. And it's also about intimacy as well, isn't it? Letting ourselves be seen, even in the midst of our pain, and letting others witness the parts of us that we've kept hidden all along. In essence, letting connection be real instead of rehearsed. So, what now, my dear listener? What do we do when we realize how long we've been living inside someone else's version of what enough could be? Well, we start by giving ourselves permission. Permission to rest. Permission to say no. Permission to ask again. Permission to stop explaining ourselves. Permission to be imperfect. Permission to outgrow the roles that were handed to us. Permission to take up space and want more in life. Because the truth is, you are enough and you are allowed. And this life is yours. Not as a reward, not as a prize for good behavior, but as a birthright. In tomorrow's episode, we're going to begin our second week in this series of worthiness, and it's undoing the lies. And we'll start by confronting one of the most deeply embedded of those lies, and that is our worth that is tied to our usefulness. But today, let's take this one with us, and that is we don't have to keep living in exile from our wholeness. And we were never too much. We were never not enough. And we don't need anyone else's permission to come back to ourselves. We're already where we need to be amidst our worthiness. Thanks for listening in. I will see you in tomorrow's episode.